My dad had a second family for 20 years. They showed up at his funeral. The first sign that something was wrong came during the viewing. I was standing beside Dad's casket, mechanically shaking hands with a parade of coworkers and distant relatives, when a woman I'd never seen before approached with two teenage boys trailing behind her. She was maybe 45 with auburn hair and the kind of quiet elegance that suggested she'd known real sorrow. The boys looked uncomfortable in their ill-fitting suits, but there was something about their faces that made my stomach clench. Something familiar in the slope of their noses, the set of their jaws. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly, her voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. "Your father he was a good man." I nodded politely, assuming she was another colleague from Dad's engineering firm. But instead of moving on, she lingered, her eyes fixed on his peaceful face with an intensity that seemed inappropriate for a casual acquaintance. "Excuse me," I said, my funeral director voice kicking in, "but how did you know my father?" The woman's composure cracked slightly. She glanced at the boys, then back at me, as if making a calculation. "I'm Elena Rodriguez," she said finally. "And these are our sons, Miguel and Carlos." Our sons. The words hung in the air like smoke from extinguished candle. I stared at the boys. Miguel appeared to be about 17, Carlos maybe 15, and felt reality tilt sideways. They had Dad's dark eyes. Carlos had his dimpled chin. Miguel's hands were exact replicas of the ones now folded peacefully in the casket. "I think there's been some mistake," I managed to say, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew there hadn't been. Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Robert talked about you and Jessica all the time. He was so proud of you both. I know this is I know this is impossible to understand, but I thought you should know that he loved you. Both families. That was his greatest struggle." The funeral parlor seemed to spin around me. My sister Jessica, who'd been greeting mourners near the entrance, appeared at my side as if summoned by crisis. "What's happening?" she whispered. But one look at the boys answered her question. The family resemblance was undeniable. "Mom needs to see this," I said numbly. But Mom was already seeing it. From across the room, I watched her face go white as she took in the scene. 53 years of marriage, and a stranger was standing beside her husband's casket with children who looked exactly like him. Elena seemed to sense the mounting tension. "Perhaps we should go," she said quietly to the boys in Spanish. But Miguel, God, he even had Dad's stubborn streak, shook his head. "We have as much right to be here as anyone," he said in perfect English. "He was our father, too." The viewing room went silent. Every conversation stopped as mourners sensed drama unfolding. Mom approached slowly, her dignity intact despite the shock written across her features. "How long?" she asked Alina directly, her voice steady but deadly quiet. 22 years, Alina replied. "Since Miguel was born." 22 years. I did the math quickly. I'd been 8 years old when this began. Jessica had been 5. We'd been little children building sandcastles and learning to ride bikes while Dad was building an entirely separate life 2 hours away in Sacramento. "Did you know about us?" Mom asked. Alina nodded miserably. "From the beginning. He never lied about being married. He said, he said his marriage was complicated, that there were children involved, that he couldn't leave, but he couldn't stop loving me either." "So you decided to have children with a married man?" Jessica's voice cut through the air like a blade. "I decided to love someone who loved me back," Elena replied with quiet dignity. "I'm not proud of how it started, but I won't apologize for my son's existence." The funeral director materialized beside us with practiced crisis management skills. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation in the family room," he suggested smoothly. What followed was the most surreal hour of my life. Sitting in a circle of folding chairs while my father's body lay 20 feet away, we pieced together the architecture of his double life. Dad had met Elena at a construction site where his firm was consulting. She'd been working as a translator for the largely Hispanic construction crew. Their affair had started slowly. Coffee meetings, long phone conversations, weekend business trips that weren't business at all. When Elena became pregnant with Miguel, Dad had faced a choice. He'd chosen to stay married to Mom while also supporting Elena and their child. For over 2 decades, he'd maintained two separate households, two sets of relationships, two completely different versions of himself. How did he manage it? I asked, genuinely curious despite my anger. The logistics alone seemed impossible. He was methodical, Elena said. Every other weekend, he'd drive to Sacramento. He told your mother he was visiting his brother. He told us he had work obligations that kept him away most of the time. Uncle Paul, Jessica said suddenly. He always said he was visiting Uncle Paul. Uncle Paul, who had actually died 15 years ago. Another lie in an architecture of deception that now seemed staggering in its complexity. What about money? Mom asked. How did he afford? He gave me enough for basics, Elena said. I worked full-time, raised the boys mostly alone. He wasn't trying to maintain two full families. He was trying to be present for children he'd brought into the world. Carlos, who'd been silent throughout the conversation, finally spoke up. He came to my soccer games when he could, helped Miguel with college applications. He wasn't a perfect father, but he was our father. The pain in his voice was raw, authentic. This 15-year-old boy had just lost his dad and was now discovering that his entire family structure had been built on secrets and lies. Where do we go from here? Elena asked. I know this is devastating for your family, but my boys just lost their father too. They deserve to grieve him, even if the circumstances are complicated. Mom was quiet for a long time, studying the two boys who were, genetically speaking, her stepsons. Finally, she spoke. The service is at 10 tomorrow morning. If you'd like to attend, you're welcome. Elena's relief was palpable. Thank you. That means more than you know. The funeral itself was a masterpiece of awkward coexistence. Elena and the boys sat in the back while our family occupied the front rows. I kept stealing glances at Miguel and Carlos, trying to process the fact that these strangers were my half-brothers. During the eulogy, I found myself editing my remarks in real time. Stories about Dad's dedication to family took on different meanings when half the audience was hearing about a man they'd only known part-time. His work ethic suddenly seemed less admirable when I realized he'd needed it to support two households. But the most jarring moment came during the burial. As we stood around the grave, Carlos broke down completely. His sobs were heartbroken, genuine, and absolutely identical to the way I'd cried when my childhood dog died. The same hitching breath, the same shoulder shaking, genetics expressing themselves in grief. Miguel put his arm around his younger brother with a protective gesture. I recognized from every family photo where I was comforting Jessica. These boys weren't just random children Dad had fathered. They were our siblings, shaped by the same paternal influence that had molded us. After the service, Elena approached Mom with obvious trepidation. I want you to know, she said, I never wanted to hurt your family. When I fell in love with Robert, I thought I could handle being second. I thought it would be enough to have pieces of him. But children change everything. They deserved a father, not a part-time visitor. Did you ever ask him to leave us? Mom asked. Once, when Carlos was born, I thought maybe if he had two sons to consider. She trailed off. He said he couldn't destroy one family to legitimize another, that it wouldn't be fair to you or Jessica or David. So instead, he chose to live a lie for 20 years. He chose to love him perfectly rather than abandon completely, Elena replied. I'm not saying it was right, but I understand why he did it. Over the following weeks, the logistics of Dad's secret life continued to unfold. He'd maintained separate bank accounts, used different credit cards for his Sacramento expenses, and somehow managed his calendar so seamlessly that neither family had ever suspected the depth of his deception. The most painful discovery was his phone. Two phones, actually, one for each life. His Sacramento phone contained thousands of text messages with Elena about school events, family dinners, and the ordinary intimacies of daily life. Photos of Miguel's graduation, Carlos's first day of high school, family barbecues where they looked genuinely happy. He was living two completely authentic lives, Jessica observed after we'd spent an afternoon going through his things. That's what's so disturbing. It wasn't like he was just having an affair. He was fully invested in both families. The legal complications were Byzantine. Dad's will left everything to Mom, but Elena produced documents showing he'd been paying rent on their house, supporting the boys' education, and had even started a small college fund for Carlos. Technically, these weren't obligations that survived his death, but morally, the situation was murky. Mom surprised everyone by initiating contact with Elena to discuss the boys' futures. Whatever else Robert was, he was their father, she told me when I questioned her decision to help with Miguel's college tuition. Those boys didn't choose this situation, and they shouldn't be punished for their father's choices. Miguel enrolled at UC Davis on a partial scholarship Dad had helped him secure. Carlos continued at his Sacramento high school, where he played varsity soccer with the same intensity Dad had brought to his own athletics in college. Elena sent us updates occasionally, report cards, team photos, graduation announcements. The strangest part was how much we all had in common. Miguel was studying engineering, just like I had. Carlos had Dad's mechanical aptitude and spent weekends rebuilding motorcycle engines. They were us, essentially, the sons Dad might have had if he'd made different choices 25 years ago. A year after the funeral, Elena called with news that changed everything. She'd been diagnosed with breast cancer and needed to start immediate treatment. The boys were legal adults, but barely, and she had no family support system in California. I know this is asking too much, she said when she called Mom, but if something happens to me, the boys will be alone. I don't know who else to call. Mom didn't hesitate. Send them here, we'll figure it out. And just like that, I found myself with two teenage half brothers living in my childhood home while their mother fought for her life 3 hours away. The adjustment was awkward for everyone, but Carlos immediately bonded with Mom over cooking, and Miguel surprised Jessica by helping her fix her car with the same methodical precision Dad had always used. Living together, the family resemblances became impossible to ignore. Miguel had Dad's habit of tapping his fingers when he was thinking. Carlos laughed exactly like Jessica. They both inherited Dad's sweet tooth and his complete inability to remember where he'd put his keys. More importantly, we discovered we shared Dad's values: work ethic, loyalty to family, and a stubborn determination to fix things that were broken, including, apparently, the fractured family he'd left behind. Elena's treatment was successful, but the experience had bonded us in ways none of us had expected. When she was strong enough to have the boys back, Carlos asked if he could finish high school in our town instead. I like it here, he said simply. I like having siblings. 5 years later, we're an unconventional but functioning family unit. Miguel graduated engineering school and works for the same firm Dad had. Carlos just started college on a soccer scholarship. Elena moved closer after her recovery and has become something like a sister to Mom, two women united by their shared experience of loving the same complicated man. We still don't know how to explain our family structure to outsiders. "These are my half-brothers" feels inadequate for relationships that have grown far beyond genetic technicalities. Extended family doesn't capture the intimacy that developed through shared crisis. What we've learned is that Dad's greatest failure was also, in some ways, his greatest success. He failed to live honestly, but he succeeded in creating two sets of children who shared his capacity for love, loyalty, and forgiveness. His deception brought us together in ways his honesty never could have. I understand now that Dad wasn't simply a liar or a cheater. He was a man trying to honor contradictory commitments without destroying anyone. His solution was imperfect and ultimately unsustainable, but it came from a place of love rather than selfishness. The funeral that revealed his secret also revealed something else. Families aren't just created by marriage certificates and birth announcements. They're created by choice, commitment, and the decision to love people despite their imperfections. Dad left us a complicated legacy, but he also left us each other. And maybe, in the end, that's the greatest gift a flawed man can give his children, siblings, to share the burden of understanding him. We visit his grave together now, all four siblings and both mothers. It's crowded around that headstone, but it feels right. Dad spent 20 years keeping his two families separate. In death, he finally brought us together. The inscription reads simply, "Beloved father and husband." It doesn't specify to whom, and that seems appropriate. Love, we've learned, doesn't follow the rules we think it should. Sometimes it's messy, complicated, and divided among people who should have been strangers. But it's still love, and in the end, that's what matters most.